The fluorescent lights of Chicago General Hospital cast everything in harsh, clinical white at 2:17 in the morning. Zara Williams pushed her braids back from her face, the exhaustion weighing on her shoulders like a lead blanket after 14 hours of processing insurance claims and medical billing disputes. The emergency ward never slept, but the administrative wing had finally quieted to the distant hum of machines and the occasional echo of footsteps in sterile hallways. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for her phone, the third cup of coffee having worn off hours ago. The numbers on her grandmother's medical estimate swam before her tired eyes. $87,000 for the heart surgery. The insurance would cover 60% if they were lucky, if the appeal went through, if Grandma Rose could wait another 6 weeks for approval. 60% still left $30,000 they didn't have. Zara scrolled through her contacts, looking for her cousin Marcus, who worked construction and always seemed to know someone who knew someone. Maybe he'd heard of another program, another option, another miracle they hadn't considered yet. Her thumb hovered over his name, then press call before switching to text instead. Too late for a phone call, but Marcus was a night owl who'd probably see the message. The words poured out faster than she could think them through, desperation making her fingers fly across the screen. Marcus, I know it's late, but I need help. Grandma Rose needs surgery, and we're short $30K even with insurance. I've tried everything: payment plans, charity care, medical loans. The surgery has to happen within the month, or her heart won't hold out. I'm working double shifts, but it's not enough. I'm scared we're going to lose her, and I don't know what else to do. Please tell me you've got some idea, because I'm drowning here. She hit send before she could second-guess herself, then immediately slumped back in her chair. Asking for help never got easier, even from family. Especially from family. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford anymore. Not when Grandma Rose was the woman who'd raised her after her parents died, who'd worked 3 jobs to keep Zara in school, who'd never once made her feel like a burden. For those of you watching from cities where the nights feel endless and hope feels thin, where do you find the strength to keep going when everything seems impossible? Comment below and let me know where you're watching from tonight. Her phone buzzed almost immediately. Too fast for Marcus, she realized, glancing at the screen with a frown. The response made her blood run cold. This is not Marcus. You have reached someone else entirely. Your message suggests you are in considerable distress regarding medical expenses. Perhaps we should discuss this matter in person. Zara stared at the words, her heart beginning to race. She'd sent the most vulnerable, desperate message of her life to a complete stranger. Her fingers shook as she typed back rapidly. I'm so sorry, wrong number. Please just delete that message and forget you saw it. The response came back within seconds, as if the person had been waiting by their phone. I do not believe in coincidences, Miss Williams. And I do not forget messages that find their way to me. You mentioned $30,000 in a timeline of 1 month. These are specific numbers. Specific desperation. The fact that this stranger somehow knew her name made her mouth go dry. She hadn't included her name in the original text, which meant whoever this was had resources, connections, ways of finding information that ordinary people didn't have. How do you know my name? Who is this? There was a longer pause this time, long enough for Zara to consider turning off her phone entirely and pretending this conversation had never happened. But $30,000 was $30,000, and Grandma Rose was running out of time. My name is Kong Jinwoo. I am someone who has the means to solve problems that others cannot. Your problem interests me, Miss Williams. People who text strangers at 2 in the morning asking for $30,000 are usually either very desperate or very dangerous. You do not sound dangerous. The formal way he wrote, the precision of his words, sent warning bells through her head. This wasn't some random person with a wrong number. This was someone important, someone with power, someone who probably shouldn't be having this conversation with a hospital billing clerk from the South Side. I can't accept help from a stranger. Thank you, but this was a mistake. But even as she typed it, she hesitated before hitting send. $32,000. 1 month. Grandma Rose's heart getting weaker every day she waited. Before she could send a rejection, another message appeared. Tomorrow evening at 7. The Peninsula Hotel, downtown. Resilienceandhonor. Come alone, and we will discuss terms. Do not disappoint me, Miss Williams. People who text me about desperation rarely get second chances to solve their problems. Zara stared at the screen until the words blurred together. This was insane. Meeting a stranger who somehow knew her full name, who talked about terms and disappointment like he was negotiating business deals instead of helping someone in crisis. Everything logical in her head screamed that this was dangerous, stupid, probably illegal. But Grandma Rose was dying, and $30,000 was exactly what they needed. Her phone buzzed one more time. Your grandmother is Rose Williams, age 73, admitted to Chicago General 6 days ago with congestive heart failure. She is scheduled for valve replacement surgery pending insurance approval. Dr. Harrison Kim is her cardiologist. Room 314 in the cardiac wing. I know exactly who you are, Miss Williams. The question is whether you are brave enough to discover who I am. The phone slipped from Zara's numb fingers, clattering onto her desk. This stranger knew everything. Her grandmother's full name, her room number, her doctor, details that weren't public information, which meant he had access to medical records, hospital systems, personal information that should have been impossible to find. She was either about to meet her guardian angel or walk straight into the most dangerous mistake of her life. But as she looked around the empty administrative wing at the stack of unpaid bills on her desk and the second job application she'd filled out during her break, Zara realized she was already drowning. Maybe it was time to see if this dangerous stranger was offering her a lifeline or just a prettier way to sink. Zara had managed exactly 3 hours of sleep before her phone alarm dragged her back to consciousness at 6 in the morning. The Peninsula Hotel meeting haunted her dreams, mixing with images of Grandma Rose's frail hands and the steady beep of heart monitors. She'd changed her mind 17 times about going, but each time she looked at the medical bills stacked on her kitchen table, the decision made itself. By the time her evening shift started at Chicago General, nervous energy had replaced exhaustion. She'd worn her best professional outfit, a navy blazer over dark jeans, telling herself it was just in case. Just in case this Kong Jin Woo was legitimate. Just in case $30,000 was actually within reach. The cardiac wing felt different tonight, charged with possibility and dread. Room 314 drew her like a magnet during her break. Grandma Rose was awake, her dark eyes bright despite the oxygen cannula and the forest of 4 lines connecting her to various machines. Zara, baby, you look worried sick, her grandmother said, reaching for her hand with fingers that fell paper thin. Stop fussing over me and go live your life. I'm too stubborn to die in some hospital bed. If only stubbornness was enough, Zara thought, squeezing those fragile fingers gently. She forced a smile instead of voicing her fears about surgery dates and insurance appeals and the crushing weight of medical debt that threatened to bury them both. I'm fine, Grandma Rose. Just tired from working doubles. You focus on getting stronger. But as she walked back toward the administrative wing, Zara couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. The sensation crept along her spine like ice water, making her glance over her shoulder twice before she reached her desk. The financial services department was empty except for the security guard making his rounds. Zara settled into her chair and tried to focus on processing claims, but her mind kept drifting to 7 o'clock. The Peninsula Hotel was a 40-minute train ride from the hospital. She could leave at 6:15, meet this mysterious stranger, and be back for the end of her shift by 9 if things went badly. At 6:10, her phone buzzed. Change of plans. I am coming to you. Do not leave the hospital. Zara's blood turned to ice. She typed back quickly, her fingers shaking. No, we agreed on the hotel. Public place. Too late. I'm already here. The elevator chimed at the end of the hallway, and Zara's heart slammed against her ribs. She heard footsteps, measured and confident, moving in her direction with the certainty of someone who knew exactly where they were going. When the man rounded the corner into the financial services department, every instinct in her body screamed danger. Kong Jinwoo looked like money and power wrapped in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than her annual salary. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with sharp features and dark hair styled with expensive precision. But it was his eyes that made her breath catch. They were intelligent, assessing, and absolutely ruthless. This was a man who was accustomed to getting exactly what he wanted. "Miss Williams," he said, his voice carrying the faintest hint of an accent that made her name sound formal and exotic. His tone was controlled, polite, but there was steel underneath that made it clear this was not a request for conversation. "How did you get up here?" Zara managed, staying seated behind her desk, because standing felt like surrendering territory. "This is a restricted floor after visiting hours." Jinwoo smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I find that most restrictions disappear when properly motivated. Your security guard was very accommodating once we discussed his daughter's college tuition." The casual way he mentioned manipulating people sent chills down her spine. This man didn't just bend rules. He broke them with surgical precision. He moved closer to her desk, and she caught the scent of expensive cologne mixed with something darker, more dangerous. Everything about him radiated controlled power, from the way he carried himself to the way his gaze cataloged every detail of her workspace. "You mentioned $30,000 and a timeline of 1 month," Jinwoo said, settling into the chair across from her desk without being invited. He moved like a predator, fluid and silent. "Your grandmother's surgery. Dr. Kim is an excellent cardiac surgeon. She will recover well under his care, provided the surgery happens within the appropriate window." "How do you know all of this?" Zara whispered. She wanted to sound strong, defiant, but the words came out shaky and small. "Knowledge is power, Miss Williams. And power is what allows me to solve problems that others cannot." He leaned forward slightly, studying her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed, vulnerable. "You are wondering if I am legitimate or dangerous. The answer is both. I can accept money from someone I don't know, especially someone who talks like you do." "Like what?" he asked, tilting his head with genuine curiosity. "Like you're used to people doing whatever you tell them to do. Like you expect me to be grateful enough to ignore how terrifying this conversation is." Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of what might have been approval. "Smart. You should be terrified. But you are also desperate, and desperation makes people willing to consider options they would otherwise reject." Zara forced herself to meet his gaze directly. "What do you want in return?" Jinwoo was silent for a long moment, his dark eyes never leaving hers. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, measured, and absolutely final. "You, for 6 months. You will live in my home, follow my rules, and be available when I require your presence. In exchange, I will pay for your grandmother's surgery and all associated medical expenses. Full recovery, private room, the best care Chicago has to offer." The words hit her like physical blows. "You want me to be your what?" "Your mistress. Your prisoner. I want you to be mine," he said simply. "The specifics of that arrangement will be determined by your behavior and attitude. But make no mistake, Miss Williams. For 6 months, your time, your presence, your attention will belong to me completely." Zara's hands clenched into fists on her desk. "That's human trafficking. That's slavery. That is a contract between 2 consenting adults. You are free to refuse and continue working double shifts while your grandmother's condition deteriorates. I am free to offer this arrangement to someone else who needs $30,000 more urgently." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a thick envelope, placing it on her desk with deliberate precision. Inside this envelope is a cashier's check for $90,000. Enough for the surgery, recovery, and any complications that might arise. All you have to do is say yes. 90,000. More than enough. More than she'd dare to hope for. Zara stared at the envelope like it might explode. "Why me?" she whispered. "You could have anyone. Why would you want some broke hospital clerk who can't even afford her grandmother's medical bills?" Jinwoo stood, smoothing his suit jacket with movements that spoke of absolute confidence. "Because you texted a stranger at 2 in the morning asking for help. Because you worked double shifts trying to save someone you love. Because when I found you tonight, You didn't try to run or scream or call security. You sat here and asked intelligent questions instead of making emotional decisions. He moved around the desk, stopping close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. This close, she could see flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could feel the controlled power radiating from him like heat from a furnace. You have 48 hours to decide, Miss Williams. After that, the offer expires and I find someone else to fill the position. Choose carefully. People who disappoint me rarely get second chances. Jean Wu turned to leave, then paused at the edge of her desk. One more thing. Do not research me online. Do not ask questions about my business or my associates. Do not involve anyone else in this decision. If you accept my offer, you will learn everything you need to know about my world soon enough. He walked away with the same measured confidence he'd arrived with, leaving Zara alone with $90,000 and the most dangerous decision of her life. She stared at the envelope until her vision blurred, knowing that touching it would make this real in a way she wasn't sure she could handle. But down the hall in room 314, Grandma Rose was sleeping fitfully, her heart growing weaker with every passing day. And 48 hours suddenly felt like both an eternity and no time at all. 5 weeks had passed since Grandma Rose's surgery, and her recovery was progressing beautifully. Zara had fallen into the habit of visiting Northwestern Memorial every few days, always accompanied by one of Jinwoo's security team, but feeling increasingly comfortable with the routine. Today, Park had been called away for urgent business, leaving her with Minjun, a younger member of the security detail who was polite but less experienced. The cardiac wing felt different as soon as they stepped off the elevator. Too quiet, with a tension in the air that made Zara's instincts prickle with unease. The usual bustle of nurses and staff seemed muted, and she noticed several unfamiliar faces in the hallway, men in casual clothing who watched her approach with interest that felt anything but casual. Grandma Rose was sitting up in bed, looking stronger than she had in months, her color improved and her eyes bright with recovered vitality. But even she seemed to sense something off about the afternoon, glancing toward the window with an expression of concern that deepened when she saw Zara's face. "You look worried, baby girl," her grandmother said, reaching for her hand with fingers that felt reassuringly strong. "Everything all right at home?" "Everything's fine," Zara assured her, though she kept glancing toward the doorway where Minjun stood with his back to them, speaking quietly into his earpiece. "Just tired from work." But the unease in her stomach only grew stronger as the visit progressed. The unfamiliar men in the hallway seemed to multiply, and she noticed that several regular staff members were conspicuously absent. When Minjun approached her chair with an expression of barely controlled alarm, Zara's heart began to race. "Miss Williams, we need to leave immediately," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "Mr. Kong has ordered your immediate return to the residence." "What's wrong?" Zara asked, standing quickly and kissing Grandma Rose's forehead. "I'll be back tomorrow," she promised, trying to keep her voice calm despite the fear creeping up her throat. The walk to the elevator felt like the longest journey of her life. Minjun stayed close beside her, his hand hovering near his jacket in a way that suggested he was prepared for trouble. As the elevator doors closed, Zara caught a glimpse of two of the unfamiliar men moving quickly down the hallway toward the cardiac wing. "Minjun, what's happening?" she demanded as they descended. "Why are there strange men on my grandmother's floor?" Before he could answer, the elevator shuddered to a stop between floors. The lights went out for several heart-stopping seconds before emergency lighting kicked in, casting everything in an ominous red glow. Minjun immediately pushed Zara behind him and drew a gun that looked sleek and deadly in the confined space. "Stay behind me," he ordered, his previous politeness replaced by cold professionalism. "Do not move, do not speak, do not do anything unless I tell you to." The elevator doors were forced open from above, and Zara's world exploded into chaos. Men rappelled down through the opening, moving with military precision and armed with weapons that made Minjun's pistol look like a toy. Minjun fired twice before he was overwhelmed, and Zara watched in horror as he crumpled to the elevator floor. Before she could scream, a cloth was pressed over her nose and mouth, filled with a chemical smell that made her vision blur and her knees buckle. The last thing she saw before unconsciousness claimed her was one of her captors speaking rapidly into a radio, words in Korean that sounded like coordinates and time schedules. She woke up in what appeared to be an abandoned warehouse, her head pounding and her mouth dry as cotton. Her wrists were bound with zip ties, but she was sitting in a chair rather than restrained to it, suggesting her captors wanted her conscious and mobile. The space around her was vast and dim, filled with shipping containers and industrial equipment that cast strange shadows in the weak light filtering through dirty windows. 3 men stood near a table covered with cell phones and electronics, their conversation in Korean too rapid for her to catch any familiar words. But their body language spoke of urgency and anticipation, like predators waiting for their trap to spring. The oldest of the 3, a man with silver hair and expensive clothes that couldn't disguise the violence in his bearing, approached her chair with a smile that made her skin crawl. "Miss Williams," he said, his English accented but clear, "welcome to our temporary accommodation. I apologize for the dramatic nature of your transportation, but time was of the essence." "What do you want?" Zara managed, her voice hoarse from whatever they'd used to drug her. "Why are you doing this?" "We want Kong Jin-woo to understand that his recent expansion into our territory has consequences," the man replied, settling into a chair across from her. "My name is Lee Sang-min, and I represent certain business interests that your companion has been interfering with. You, Miss Williams, are a method of communication." One of the other men said something in Korean, holding up a cell phone with obvious excitement. Lee Sang-min's smile widened in a way that made Zara's blood run cold. "Excellent. Mr. Kong has received our message and is, as expected, highly motivated to negotiate. He apparently values your safety quite highly for someone who is merely a temporary arrangement. He's going to kill you," Zara said with more confidence than she felt. "All of you. When he finds out what you've done." Lee Sang-min laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Miss Williams, Kong Jin-woo is a businessman, not a warrior. He will negotiate like a rational person because the alternative is watching you suffer the consequences of his pride." But even as he spoke, Zara caught the sound of vehicles approaching outside, engines moving fast and with purpose. Lee Sang-min heard it too, his expression shifting from amusement to concern as the sound grew louder and more numerous. The first explosion took out the warehouse's main entrance in a shower of concrete and twisted metal. Through the smoke and debris, figures moved with lethal precision, and Zara realized she was about to witness a side of Jinwoo's world that had been carefully hidden from her until now. What followed was less like a rescue and more like an extermination. Jinwoo's men moved through the warehouse like avenging angels, their coordination and efficiency suggesting extensive training and experience with exactly this type of situation. The sound of gunfire was brief but decisive, and within minutes the vast space had fallen into an ominous silence. Jinwoo appeared through the settling smoke like something out of a nightmare, his usual controlled elegance replaced by something primal and terrifying. His expensive suit was torn and stained, his hands were bloody, and his eyes held a cold fury that made her captor's violence look like children playing with toys. Lee Sang-min tried to speak, tried to negotiate, tried to use Zara as a shield. Jinwoo listened to approximately 3 words before putting a bullet between his eyes with casual precision. The other 2 men died just as quickly, just as quietly, dispatched with an efficiency that spoke of long practice and absolute commitment. When Jinwoo reached Zara's chair, his expression immediately shifted from lethal predator to concerned protector. His hands were gentle as he cut away her restraints, his voice soft as he murmured reassurances in both Korean and English. But she could feel the violence still radiating from him, the barely controlled fury that hadn't been entirely satisfied by the deaths of her captors. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his fingers tracing along her face with devastating tenderness. "Did they touch you, threaten you, harm you in any way?" I'm okay, Zara whispered, though she wasn't sure that was entirely true. Physically, she was unharmed, but watching Jinwoo kill 3 men with the same calm precision he brought to business meetings had shaken something fundamental in her understanding of who he was. He lifted her from the chair as if she weighed nothing, carrying her through the warehouse and past the bodies of men who had thought they could use her as leverage against him. She buried her face against his shoulder, not wanting to see the extent of the carnage he'd unleashed to get her back. The ride back to his penthouse passed in tense silence. Jinwoo's arms around her like a fortress while he spoke in rapid Korean to his surviving team members. Zara caught enough words to understand they were discussing cleanup, witnesses, and making sure no trace of the afternoon's events would ever surface. It wasn't until they were back in the safety of his home that Jinwoo finally spoke to her directly. "I should have anticipated this," he said, his voice rough with self-recrimination. "Lee Sang-min has been testing my boundaries for months. I should have eliminated the threat before it touched you." "You killed them," Zara said quietly, the reality of what she'd witnessed finally sinking in. "You killed all of them without hesitation." "Yes," Jinwoo replied, meeting her gaze directly. "And I would kill 1,000 more to protect you. Anyone who threatens what is mine dies, Miss Williams. That is not a negotiation or a warning. It is a simple fact of my world." The possessive intensity in his voice should have terrified her. Instead, it sent heat racing through her veins like liquid fire. This was what real protection looked like, she realized. Not promises or contracts or abstract assurances, but absolute commitment backed by the willingness to destroy anything that posed a threat. "I was so scared," she whispered, and suddenly the emotion she'd been holding back throughout the ordeal came pouring out. "Not just of them, but of losing you, of never seeing you again." Jinwoo's control finally cracked, and he pulled her against him with desperate intensity. "You will never lose me," he said, his voice breaking with emotion she'd never heard from him before. "I would burn the world down before I let anyone take you from me." They stood there in his living room, clinging to each other like survivors of a shipwreck, and Zara realized that somewhere in the violence and terror of the afternoon, she'd stopped being his contractual obligation and become something infinitely more precious. The way he'd looked at her captors before killing them, the fury in his voice when he'd promised to protect her, the gentleness in his hands despite the blood still staining them. She was his now, completely and irrevocably. But more importantly, he was hers as well. And that knowledge changed everything about the 3 months remaining on their contract. The aftermath of the warehouse confrontation rippled through Jinwoo's organization with swift and decisive efficiency. Within 48 hours, Lee Sang-min's entire operation had been systematically dismantled, his associates either eliminated or driven so far underground they would never pose a threat again. The message sent through Chicago's Korean underworld was clear and final. Touching anything that belonged to Kang Jinwoo was a death sentence. But it was the conversation 3 days later that changed everything for Zara. She found Jinwoo in his office at dawn, still dressed in the same clothes from the night before, surrounded by documents and surveillance photos that painted a comprehensive picture of threats neutralized and territory secured. He looked up when she entered, exhaustion and relief warring for dominance in his dark eyes. "It's finished," he said simply, gesturing to the papers scattered across his desk. Lee Sang-min's network, his allies, anyone who might seek revenge for his death. All of it eliminated or brought under control. "You're safe now, completely and permanently." Zara moved closer, studying his face in the early morning light streaming through the windows. "What does that mean for us?" she asked quietly. "For our arrangement." Jinwoo was silent for a long moment, then reached into his desk drawer and withdrew a familiar document. Their contract, signed 6 weeks ago in a moment of desperate pragmatism, outlining 6 months of her life in exchange for her grandmother's surgery. He held it between them like a barrier, his expression unreadable. "The terms of our agreement were specific," he said carefully. 6 months in exchange for medical expenses. The external circumstances that made your captivity necessary for your protection no longer exist." Zara's heart sank. even though she'd known this moment would come. "You're releasing me from the contract." Instead of answering, Jinwoo stood and walked to the fireplace that dominated one wall of his office. He touched a button, and flames sprang to life behind the glass. Then, without ceremony, he fed their contract to the fire, watching the papers curl and blacken until nothing remained but ash. "There is no more contract," he said, turning back to face her. "No more debt, no more obligation, no more forced proximity. You are free to leave whenever you choose, to return to your life without any interference from me or my world." The words should have filled her with relief. Freedom, the chance to return to her ordinary life, to escape the dangerous luxury that had become her cage. Instead, Zara felt something that could only be described as grief, as if he'd just burned away 6 months that had become the most meaningful of her life. "And if I choose not to leave?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jinwoo's careful composure cracked, and she saw something vulnerable and desperate flash across his features before he could hide it behind his usual mask of control. "Then you would be staying for different reasons," he said, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. "Not because you owe me anything, not because circumstances force your hand, but because you want to be here. Because you choose this life, choose this world, choose me." He moved closer, stopping just within reach, but not touching, as if her answer might determine whether he ever had the right to touch her again. "I need you to understand what that choice means, Zara. This world, my world, will always carry dangers. There will always be men like Lee Sang-min who see anyone I care about as a potential weapon against me. There will always be violence simmering beneath the surface of everything we do." "I know," she said softly. "I saw what you did to protect me. I saw what you're capable of when someone threatens what you consider yours." "And that doesn't terrify you?" he asked, genuine confusion in his voice. "The blood, the killing, the complete absence of mercy when something I love is threatened." "It should terrify me," Zara admitted, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. "A month ago, it would have sent me running and never looking back. But now, all I can think about is how safe I felt in your arms after you found me. How protected, how absolutely certain I was that nothing could hurt me as long as you were there." Jinwoo closed his eyes and leaned into her touch with something that looked like relief and surrender combined. "I have never needed anyone before," he confessed, his voice barely audible. "Never allowed myself to depend on another person's presence for my peace of mind. But these past weeks with you, the thought of losing you, of going back to the way things were before you texted that wrong number." He opened his eyes, and she saw everything he was afraid to say written in their depths. The powerful, controlled man who commanded respect and fear throughout Chicago's underworld was terrified of being abandoned by a woman who'd stumbled into his life by accident. "I love you," Zara said, the words coming easier than she'd expected. Not the arrangement, not the luxury, not even the protection, though all of those things matter. "I love you, Jinwoo. The man who notices when I need coffee, who remembers that I like historical biographies, who held me while I cried over my grandmother's surgery. I love the way you listen when I talk about my dreams, the way you make me feel intelligent and valued and precious." Something shifted in his expression, hope beginning to eclipse the fear and uncertainty. "You love me," he repeated, as if testing the words. "I love you," she confirmed, "and I choose you. Not because I have to, not because I owe you anything, but because a life without you in it feels empty and gray and pointless." Jinwoo's control finally shattered completely, and he pulled her against him with desperate intensity, burying his face in her hair while his shoulders shook with suppressed emotion. "I love you beyond reason," he whispered against her neck. "Beyond logic, beyond safety, beyond everything I thought I knew about myself. You have become my anchor, my peace, my only sanctuary in a world that demands constant vigilance." They stood there in his office, clinging to each other as the sun rose fully over Chicago, and Zara realized that this was what true partnership felt like. Not the careful negotiations of their contract, not the polite boundaries they'd maintained for weeks, but the complete surrender of two people who'd found something worth risking everything to protect. A month later, Zara stood in the elegant chapel of Northwestern Memorial's Interfaith Center, wearing a wedding dress that had been custom designed to blend Korean and American traditions. The ceremony was small but perfect, attended by Grandma Rose, whose recovery had been nothing short of miraculous, Park and the security team, who'd become like family, and a handful of Jinwa's business associates who managed to look respectable despite their probable criminal connections. Jinwoo had insisted on incorporating elements of Korean wedding traditions alongside American customs, creating a ceremony that honored both their heritages while symbolizing the blending of their two very different worlds. When he placed the jade ring on her finger, speaking vows in both English and Korean, Zara felt the final pieces of her old life settling into place alongside the new. The reception was held at his penthouse, transformed for the evening into something magical and romantic. As they danced on the terrace overlooking the city lights, Zara marveled at how different everything felt from that desperate night 6 months ago when she texted a stranger begging for help. "Do you ever regret it?" Jinwoo asked softly, spinning her gracefully under the stars. The wrong number text that changed everything. Zara considered the question seriously, thinking about the ordinary life she'd left behind, the safety of anonymity, the simplicity of a world without private security and international shipping concerns, and men who solve problems with violence. "Never," she said finally, meaning it completely. "That text message was the best mistake I ever made." Jinwoo smiled, the expression transforming his entire face with warmth and joy she was still getting used to seeing. "Then it was not a mistake at all, but fate ensuring that you found your way home." As they swayed together on the terrace, surrounded by the glittering lights of Chicago and the quiet murmur of their guests celebrating inside, Zara realized he was absolutely right. This dangerous, powerful, impossibly gentle man had become her home in every way that mattered. The cage had become a sanctuary, the contract had become a choice, and the stranger who terrified her had become the person she couldn't imagine living without. 6 months ago, she'd been drowning in desperation, sending frantic texts to the wrong number in the middle of the night. Tonight, she was Mrs. Kong Zara, protected by the most dangerous man in Chicago and loved beyond measure by someone who would burn the world down to keep her safe. Sometimes the best things in life came from the most impossible circumstances, and sometimes love found you in the last place you thought to look. For those of you who've stayed with us through this incredible journey from that first desperate text to this perfect moment, what's the most unexpected way love has found you in your own life? Has someone ever surprised you by becoming exactly what you needed when you needed them most? Share your own stories in the comments, because sometimes the most beautiful love stories are the ones that start with the wrong number but lead to exactly the right person.